Ohayo, konnichiwa, konbanwa. Hi everyone, welcome back to JFTN, Japan Fishing Tackle News. Today, we're sharing our first impressions and review of the new saltwater heavy-duty spinning reel from DAIWA, the Certate SW 2024. Please note that this product review represents the personal opinions of the JFTN staff and is not exhaustive. We hope you take it as just one perspective among many. Here are the specs. This time, I purchased the 5000XH model. I was honestly quite surprised by the release of this mid-sized SW reel so soon after the LT model came out earlier this year. Let's start by taking a look inside. There's nothing particularly different here. However, unlike the Certate LT, the Certate SW doesn't come with a reel bag. Both the handle and body are packed in non-woven fabric bags. The documents as usual. Inside the envelope, there's the warranty card and a small envelope with spool adjustment washers. There's also a tool to remove the handle knob cap. It's the same tool I used before for swapping the handle on the Caldea SW. It also comes with a spool band. It's the same one as on the 2023 Saltiga, which is great. Here's the handle. The handle is quite heavy and feels solid. Naturally, it's heavier than the LT model. The knob rotation is very smooth. And here's the body. Since it's an SW reel, it's a little heavy. What's interesting is the angle of the bail. It's very different from the LT model and has a much steeper angle. It's similar to Shimano's Stella or Twin Power. The handle joint has a thicker rubber cap compared to the LT model. The body color is almost the same as the LT, with the main difference being the silver part of the rotor, which has a more mirror-like finish than the LT. Let's attach the handle. Yeah, to be honest, it looks almost the same as the LT model. However, the shiny silver parts give it a slightly cheaper appearance. The drag knob, in particular, looks more plastic-like now. Let's spin. Just like when I held it at after, it feels incredibly light. It's hard to believe it's an SW reel. I'll compare it later, but it seems lighter than the 2023 Saltiga. It looks like the ZAION rotor makes a big difference here. Next is the AirDrive bail. Just like on the Exist, it opens and closes firmly and stays in position. This part seems to be definitely better than the previous Certate SW 2021. With this, there's no worry about the line missing the line roller and the bail snapping open unexpectedly. Drag sound. To be honest, this is a bit disappointing. It's quite soft and small. My Certate SW 2021 10,000-H has a much louder drag sound, so I was surprised by how quiet this one is. And now for the rotor strength. It's amazing. So strong that it's hard to believe it's made of ZAION. To be honest, I thought the AirDrive rotor would be structurally weaker than the previous air rotor, but it's incredibly strong. In fact, the Certate SW's ZAION rotor is designed specifically for SW reels, and it's different from the LT models. It really feels completely different. If you apply a lot of force, there's a tiny bit of flex, but honestly, it's at a level where it won't be an issue during actual fishing. Now, let's compare it with the LT model. Visually, they're almost the same. As I mentioned earlier, the only noticeable differences are the shiny silver parts on the rotor and drag knob. The SW model has a bigger, thicker body compared to the LT model. The gears also seem bigger. And of course, the angle of the bail. I think this change was made to address concerns about the bail opening automatically, which I talked about in my review of the Certate SW 2021. Let's compare it with the previous model. Please forgive me for the quite different sizes. The 2021 model has a slightly bluish body. Since it uses the air rotor, it looks a bit more rugged overall. The air bail is also noticeably thicker. However, the drag knob on the 2021 model feels more premium. As for the bail, the 2021 model seems to have slightly weaker holding power. In contrast, the air drive bail on the 2024 model gives a much greater sense of security, and I personally prefer it. Drag sound. The 2021 model is definitely clearer and louder, which would be easier to hear in tough conditions. This is truly disappointing. Overall, I prefer the design of the 2024 model. The curves of the monocoque body and the curved air drive rotor look well balanced, and the monochrome color scheme without any flashy colors makes it easier to pair with different rods. I'm also excited to see how the larger models, which will likely be released later, turn out. Now, let's compare it with the Saltiga 2023. The color schemes are completely different, but the overall feel is very similar. Because of the metal rotor, the Saltiga feels slightly heavier. By the way, the body size of the 5000 and 6000 models is probably almost the same. At least visually, there's no noticeable size difference. The air drive bail on the Saltiga is slightly thicker, and the angle of the bail on the Certate SW is a bit more aggressive. The color scheme is really a matter of personal preference. Maybe it's because I'm used to the classic color scheme, but the Saltiga gives off a more premium or flagship feel. If you look closely, you'll see that the Saltiga has a glittery finish, while the Certate SW, like the LT model, is much more subdued. Although the rotor materials are different, there's no obvious visual difference. Now, the drag knob. The Certate SW seems to be based on the LT model's design, while the Saltiga appears to use the design from larger models. The Saltiga's drag knob feels more premium to me. As for the bail opening and closing, perhaps due to the Certate SW having a resin rotor, it feels lighter. It's still firm enough. But the Saltiga feels even more solid, with a stronger sense of the bail staying in place. Drag sound. The Certate SW has a quieter, more muffled sound, while the Saltiga's drag is higher pitched and louder. This is a matter of personal preference, but I like the Saltiga's sound better. Let's compare the reeling. As expected, the Certate SW feels slightly lighter due to the resin rotor. You can really feel the difference. However, the Saltiga is also impressively light. In fact, it's surprising how close the metal rotor of the Saltiga comes to the lightness of a resin rotor. The smoothness of reeling in these mid-sized SW reels with air drive design is truly amazing. But in terms of practical use, I think there's almost no difference between these two reels. The Saltiga is likely more durable, but the Certate SW is a bit lighter and might have slightly less cranking power, but it's still more than enough in terms of functionality. This time, I'm going to spool the Certate SW with SUNLINE Infinitive X8, a line specifically developed for jigging. It seems to be a recent trend, but this line has a harder coating, which gives it a nice stiffness, and from my experience, the coating lasts longer as well. It's a line I've really come to like lately. I'm using PE 2.5, 300 meters. It fits the spool perfectly, no excess line or leftover space. The manufacturer's specs are spot on. Now let's take it outside and give it a try. First, let's test it with some rockshore fishing. I'll be pairing it with the SHIMANO Colt Sniper S 1000 mH rod. It's a sharp, easy to use rod for shore jigging, even with heavier lures. I'll start with a popper, the DAIWA Saltiga Dorado Popper 2130F. It has great flight posture and is easy to retrieve. First cast. Yep, no issues, it's easy to cast. The casting feel is similar to the Saltiga 2023. And again, it's incredibly light. The retrieve is so smooth that it doesn't feel like a reel meant for SW fishing. As I'm working the lure, it almost feels like I'm using an LT model. If I had to point something out, there's just a slight sense that the torque is a bit weaker than the Saltiga when retrieving during jerking. But honestly, most people probably wouldn't notice it much. The main thing to watch for is the balance with the rod. This rod weighs about 300 grams, so the reel feels slightly light. I think the Certate SW 6000 or the Saltiga would be a better match balance-wise. However, this reel still works fine. For rods around 300 grams, the 4000 size reel might feel a bit too light though. When it comes to long-distance casting, two things stand out with the Certate SW: retrieving line slack after the cast and recovering slack between lure actions. The lightweight retrieve of this reel really shines in these moments. And despite that, the reel feels solid overall, with no sense of lacking power. Next, let's try out a diving pencil. This time, it's the Maria Rapido 130F, a lure with a proven track record. Since there's less resistance during action compared to the popper, the difference between the Certate SW and the Saltiga's metal rotor becomes even less noticeable. Of course, when it comes to the feel of the retrieve, the Saltiga, likely due to its high precision in each part, feels a bit smoother and more refined. However, in terms of actual usage, I think there's almost no difference. I haven't used either for a long period, but the biggest difference between them is probably durability. If you prefer the solid feel of a metal rotor or want something of the highest quality possible, the Saltiga is the better choice. But if you don't mind the ZAION rotor and just want something that's functional for practical use, especially if the Saltiga is too expensive, then the Certate SW is more than sufficient. For topwater fishing like this, you're usually reeling constantly during jerking, without much start-stop action. In this case, the metal rotor's inertia makes continuous rotation easier. So if you prefer that inertia in the rotor, reels like the Saltiga, Stella or Twin Power might be better options. However, if you prioritize a lighter startup in your retrieve, need a certain level of toughness for rockshore fishing, and want to feel subtle changes in current or underwater conditions more precisely, then the Certate SW would be a better match. Next, let's try a sinking pencil, the Dual Hardcore Monster Shot S95. It's a heavy sinking pencil that casts far, yet has a well-designed lip to catch water, making it both a high casting and high appeal lure. Yep, it flies really well. Oh, suddenly there's a bust-up happening right next to me. I wanted to recast quickly, but because the lure flew so far, it took forever to reel back in. In the end, by the time I retrieved the lure, the fish had already dispersed, and I couldn't make the cast in time. Ah well, let's refocus. From that high-speed retrieve just now, I did notice that when you're constantly retrieving, the inertia of a metal rotor makes things easier. It's a slight difference, but when you reel for long periods, you can definitely feel it. However, when it comes to stopping and transitioning to the next cast, the smaller inertia in the Certate SW's rotor helps. It stops faster, allowing you to cast again more smoothly. Again, it's noticeable, but just a small difference. As for casting distance, I don't think there's any difference compared to the Saltiga. The casting experience feels exactly the same. Regarding the feel of the lure during use, as I mentioned earlier, if you're continuously reeling, the metal rotor is smoother. But if you're doing a lot of stop-and-go retrieves, the Certate is smoother. It's a subtle yet real difference. Let's keep switching up the lures. Next is a lighter jig, the Zeake R-Sardine, 40 grams. Since it's been low light conditions, I'm using the UV Reactive Kimura color. This jig has excellent water displacement and handles fast retrieves well. I'm testing it with a fast retrieve, and just like with the lure retrieval earlier, the stop and go action is very smooth. The low inertia during retrieval makes it feel slightly heavier, but the Certate SW excels at this kind of stop and go action. The rotor is light yet strong, so there's no issue with the jig's weight overpowering the reel. Now, let's switch to a heavier jig. Next is the Zeake F-Sardine, 60 grams. This one is a fat-bodied jig designed mainly for long casts. Its swimming range is somewhat narrow, and the action can break down if retrieved too slowly or too fast. But I often use it when casting far and retrieving at a fast speed. As expected, for these heavier jigs and continuous retrieval, the Saltiga is a bit easier to use. You need less effort to maintain the retrieve speed, which makes it easier to keep the speed stable. I'll repeat myself here. This doesn't mean the Certate SW can't handle it, just that the Saltiga is slightly better. However, the Certate SW performs perfectly fine as well. There was a bust up in the distance, so I opted for a long cast, but it was too far to reach. Let's keep switching lures. Next up is the On the Blue Glow Empelor, 80 grams. This slow jigging lure has a realistic squid shape with glow colors on every model. It's a proven lure, especially when a slow action is effective. When working a jig slowly, a lighter rotor is easier to handle. In this case, when you're stopping and starting, particularly when there's little resistance during retrieval, the ZAION rotor's lightness makes it easier to control. If I were to differentiate between using the Certate SW and Saltiga, I would use the Saltiga for fast, resistance-heavy retrieves and the Certate SW for slow, enticing techniques. When there's no tension on the line, the reel's sensitivity doesn't come into play. However, in slow jigging, where precise control over retrieve speed is needed, a composite rotor like the Certate SW's is extremely user-friendly. While an LT model would also work in these scenarios, when using jigs close to 100 grams and targeting larger fish, the heavier rods typically used make the more robust Certate SW a better match. Interestingly, I've briefly tried the LT model in the 5000 size before, and compared to that, the Certate SW 5000 feels stronger and more stable in the retrieve. This is probably due to the fact that the SW model has a stronger body and larger gears. So, for jigs around 100 grams, particularly offshore, the Certate SW is a great match for slow jigging. Now, I'll introduce some scenes where I actually hooked fish. First, on this day, I caught one using the monster shot. When bluefish started biting further out, I began making big jerks like I would with a diving pencil, repeating quick actions followed by pauses. Suddenly, I felt a strong bite. At first, I thought it might have snagged on something since the fish wasn't moving much, probably because it was facing sideways. But then, I felt it shake its head, confirming the hit. Honestly, I was so excited to have hooked it that I played with it a bit longer than necessary. But for a fish of this size, it didn't put up much of a fight. The reel's retrieval power is strong, and the EVA handle grip is easy to hold. It wasn't a big catch, but I managed to land a fish that was just legal size. The day shifted to offshore fishing, and this time I caught one using live bait. The fish didn't fight much and just felt heavy, but again, I could feel the reel's strength. Even with the ZAION rotor, which doesn't bend, it maintained smooth retrieval even under load. If you have enough strength, you probably wouldn't need to pump the rod to retrieve a fish of this size, though I didn't do that since it would have been tiring. This time, I landed a flathead around 50 centimetre. It was a short morning fishing trip, but I managed to hook another one. I had forgotten to tighten the drag when I felt the bite and set the hook, but after adjusting, the fish felt heavy again. I initially thought it might have snagged, but it seems the fish was about to take cover in the structure. After a moment, it began shaking its head and diving deeper. The drag felt very smooth as it let line out. This is typical of DAIWA reels in general. They tend to feel slightly lighter in drag strength than SHIMANO reels. With SHIMANO reels, a fish might not be able to pull drag at all, while with DAIWA, a similar pull might let a bit of drag slip. So, if you're switching from SHIMANO to DAIWA, it might be a good idea to set your drag just a little tighter than usual. This time, I landed a Maori cod. It's a great fish, but unfortunately, it was a bit undersized, so I took a photo and then released it. Conclusion. DAIWA Certate SW 2024 is a reliable, lightweight yet strong reel. The DAIWA Certate SW 2024 is not only lightweight, but also incredibly smooth, making it a highly recommended spinning reel. While it's not meant for tackling massive kingfish over 10 kilograms, it provides more than enough strength for targeting fish within the range that 4,000 to 6,000 size reels are designed for. What stands out most is its lightness during retrieval, making it ideal for locations where larger fish might still be present, allowing anglers to feel the current or finely tuned lure action. It's perfect for methods requiring repeated stop-and-go techniques, such as slow jigging, where subtle changes in action are key. Although this reel is heavier and stronger than LT models of the same 5,000 size, it retains an impressive nimbleness not seen in reels like Saltiga with a metal rotor. Despite this, its strength is more than sufficient, making it reliable even for battling reef fish. In terms of pure strength and rigidity, Saltiga may have a slight edge, but in scenarios where lighter retrieval is beneficial, the Certate SW's ease of use gives it a slight advantage. Honestly, when it comes to mid-sized spinning reels, either the Certate SW or Saltiga would be a solid choice. The decision should ultimately come down to finding the right weight balance with the rod you'll be using. I was initially unsure about the AirDrive design for SW spec reels, but in this mid-size range, it's left a great impression. Looking ahead, I suspect we'll see larger sizes released in 2025 or 2026, and I'm already excited for what's to come in the larger models. Hope you liked this video. At JFTN, our slogan is "One step closer to your dream fish," and we want to share useful fishing information with you, including tackle impressions. We hope this helps you with your fishing experience. As our channel grows, we also plan to have more giveaways and campaigns. So if you're interested, don't miss out. Please subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching.